Battlefield 6 is almost upon us. It's just a few months away. Now, of course, over the past weekend, we had the early access beta, which transitioned into an open beta, so players got the chance to play Battlefield 6, get a feel for what the game has to offer, and form their early opinions. And I'm here now to give you mine. I consider myself a colossal fan of Battlefield. If you watched my old videos on my old channel back in the day, you know how big of a fan of Battlefield I am, because I used to do countless videos on Bad Company 2, and then I tracked for years the lead up until Battlefield 3's release and did plenty of coverage and videos on that. And I was always, at that particular period of time, Battlefield over Call of Duty. I love the franchise, but we have to make it clear, and I think it's known by everybody, that Battlefield is not what it once was. It kind of took a big nosedive at a point, and hopefully Battlefield 6 is the game to kind of bring the franchise back on form. And having played the beta for about 6 or 7 hours, I genuinely believe that if it can stick the landing, there's still some concerns that I have, and I'll get into those later, but if it can stick the landing, Battlefield 6 feels like it could be Battlefield 3 Reborn, which is music to my ears as a huge fan of the franchise and that game in particular. Now, welcome to the Escapism channel. I'm your host Terrelle. Thank you for taking the time to click on this video. If you end up enjoying this video, make sure you hit the like button, that'll help me out a lot, and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Now let's get into Battlefield 6. So this Battlefield 6 beta, I went into it with, I wouldn't say high expectations, but a lot of optimism, more optimism than I thought I would. And the reason for that is the reveal of the multiplayer and the game as a whole, which happened the week prior, actually really impressed me. And like I said, I've been a huge fan of Battlefield. My first Battlefield experience started with Battlefield 1943. Actually, tell a lie, it started with Bad Company. Bad Company, I think, was the first Battlefield game I ever played, because I believe that was 2008. And then the first one I properly started to get into on the online side of things was Battlefield 1943, which came out on the PSN store back in 2009, I believe. And from there, I became a fan. Then I played Bad Company 2 and was a huge fan of the multiplayer for that. And then Battlefield 3 and so on. I was a little disappointed with Battlefield 4. And I think the main reason why I was disappointed with Battlefield 4 was mainly because of its launch. It had a really shaky launch that took a very long time for them to iron it out and make it the game that it is now. So I have kind of a negative connotation when thinking about Battlefield 4, but it's probably better than I remember. But it's not a game I immediately think when I think of the Battlefield games that I love. And then after that, Battlefield 1, which I think in hindsight is probably one of the better games in the franchise post Battlefield 3, and maybe the best game after Battlefield 3 in the franchise, in terms of the games that came out after that point. And then beyond then, you have Battlefield 5, which I completely skipped, and I skipped Battlefield 20. What was it? I can't even remember the name of it. The latest Battlefield game, the future one. Is it 2042? I skipped that one in the end. I never purchased it because I wasn't a fan of the beta for that one and the direction it was heading. And I ended up playing it only when they gave it away for free on PlayStation Plus. And by that point, it was a couple years later, I think, and they had done some things to fix up the game so it was playable and a little bit more respectable than it was at launch, but still not what I really wanted out of a Battlefield game. So fast forward till now, this beta, this past weekend, like I said, I jumped in with a lot of optimism. I played about 6 to 7 hours of it, played it with some friends as well. And I have to say, if the game can stick the landing, and this is the major caveat, if the game can stick the landing, I'm not, I haven't got my head up in the clouds as a fan. I'm not, declaring this as a great game already. I still have some concerns, which I'll get into later. And I still need to see how this game fares at launch, because I don't necessarily trust EA with their releases at launch. And that's why I don't think people should necessarily jump to pre-order this game, because they need to earn back the trust of the gamers and the fans. And they're on the right path for it, but they still need to stick the landing. So if they stick the landing, I think Battlefield 6 could be like Battlefield 3 Reborn, which would be a huge thing, especially for a fan like myself who loves Battlefield 3 and Bad Company 2 in particular. And the reason for that, or the thing that struck me when I first started playing this game, is that it feels like classic Battlefield for the most part. And Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3 are my favorites in the franchise, and this feels like a rebirth of them. It feels distinctly like them. And I remember having played the beta, I then saw a quote from someone at DICE, I believe, who said that Battlefield Bad Company 2 was almost like and I'm paraphrasing, was almost like the blueprint for what they were trying to reach, what they were trying to bring back, the feeling they were trying to evoke with this game. And I actually think in some respects they've actually nailed it in that sense, because I did feel like I was playing Bad Company 2 again, which is one of my favourite multiplayer games of all time. It felt immediately satisfying to experience this game, and it brought me back to my teenage years of playing the Battlefield games, because luckily, with the age range that I'm in, my teenage years was smack bang in the middle of that era where we had transitioned from PS2 to PS3 and 360, and the era of online gaming. So my experience in my teenage years, a lot of it, gaming wise, was online gaming for the first time, like everyone was doing, but doing it with school friends and doing it after school, and it was really fun. And it was the type of situation where, you know, back in the day when you're finishing school, you don't have a whole lot of responsibilities that you have to adhere to, so you have a lot of free time. So a lot of my evenings would be sat on either Call of Duty or Battlefield or Crisis 2 or Killzone 3 for hours on end in the evening, and just playing online with friends. And Call of Duty has a particular place in my heart during that era, especially for what it created, because Call of Duty set the blueprint down for online shooters. And Modern Warfare, COD 4 and Modern Warfare 2, Black Ops, you know, those games are classics and I love them. But Battlefield really struck something different within me during that time period. And what I loved for Battlefield was how immersive of an experience it was, the destruction, of course, and how there was like a higher skill ceiling, and you had to be more patient, and you had to strategize. And, you know, when it comes to things like snipers, you had to master the bullet drop. I remember spending a chunk of like summer 2010 mastering how to use snipers in Bad Company 2 and mastering the bullet drop, and then getting like ridiculously long distance kills with snipers to great satisfaction. I remember mastering the jets in those games and in Battlefield 3. Like, these are core memories, core gamer memories I have that the Battlefield franchise has created for me. And playing Battlefield 6 through this beta reminded me of all those in a very good way, in a positive way. And I felt like, oh, this game has laid the foundation for a game that can hopefully help me create new memories like that through this new game, which is a really, really good and promising thing. An aspect of this game that I liked and appreciated, which they've changed as opposed to some of the previous games that came out, which did this wrong, is that squads, for the most part, have been restored to what they should be, which is class-specific weapons and equipment that emphasizes the different purpose and roles within the squad. I think it was Battlefield 5 that got rid of that, and they had operators. They didn't even have classes, they just had operators like Fortnite, and that was a complete mistake, because that's the identity of Battlefield, and they removed it, whereas that's been restored with this game. One issue I have, or one concern that I have, is I did notice after a number of hours that although the classes themselves have returned, weapons aren't necessarily class locked, but there is a specific playlist you can play that does lock them. I don't necessarily like that. I think weapons should be class locked because it helps maintain the balance of having a squad and a team that's fulfilling specific roles, to the point where if you're a team member or a squad member, and this works both ways, whether you're dealing with your own team or the opposition, if you see a particular weapon, you then know who you're dealing with and what equipment they have. And like I said, that works for people on your team and people in the opposition. And I think it should remain locked and not on a separate playlist. I think that should just be in the core of the game. So that's one aspect I would critique, but I'm glad that they've restored classes in general, but I think they should lock the weapons. Sniping felt sharp and exciting as it used to be, which I'm very happy for, because like I said, back in the day, sniping was one of my favourite things to do in Battlefield, and it's one of the things I did the most when playing this beta, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time doing it. What I will say about that though, to critique the sniping, is it seems quite easy in the sense that the bullet drop seems to be minimal in this game, And like I said prior, back in Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3, sniping was a skill that you had to master to be great at, and I wonder if they've nerfed that a little to make it more accessible. And if they have, I'm not a fan of that decision, and I hope that they could balance the weapons more and the gameplay with the sniper so that it is actually more skill based, so that it's harder to get those more long distance kills because of the bullet drop. One thing I do recognize is because I did master the sniper back in the day, part of me thinks maybe it feels so easy because I've just maintained those skills over the years, and it feels right at home, which is also a credit to the game, because if it feels so right at home that I can just hop on after years of playing Battlefield properly and be sniping like I was back in 2010, maybe that says a lot about how they've designed the game and made it feel like those classic games that I loved. Hopping in a tank felt relatively satisfying, and the destruction is oh so satisfying and dynamic, really impressive. The way that the destruction is, it's not a case of, you shoot a building and one generic block or a few generic blocks of the building come down. It really feels dynamic in the sense that you're seeing like individual fragments of the building really shatter down, and it feels like an upgrade upon the destruction that we've had in some of the earlier games in the franchise. It would have potentially been nice to see some sort of levolution mechanic like they had in Battlefield 4 to really make the maps dynamic in that sense, but maybe that's something they can add later on down the line. In regards to the vehicles though, like I said, it felt satisfying to use a tank and to like mow down enemies. But then where one of my concerns are with the vehicles is that the controls with the analog are a little awkward, especially with the tanks, and maneuvering them with the analog stick. I can't remember how they were utilized in the original games from like Battlefield 3 and Bad Company. I can't remember if it was the analog stick or not, but it feels quite awkward and a bit unresponsive currently, so I think some work is needed to iron that out. I have another concern about the vehicles which relates to the maps, which I'll get onto in a moment. Overall, in terms of the immersion, which is something that I think is such a key part of what makes Battlefield, the immersion is a 10 out of 10. Stellar, the visuals are incredible, the sound design is firing on all cylinders. The sound design is an element of the Battlefield franchise that I really have high expectations for every single time. I want to feel like I'm in the middle of a battle, middle of a war on a battlefield in the heat of the moment, and this game maintains that with its incredible, impeccable sound design, from the weapons to the destruction to the vehicles and just the overall sound mix and how it's all combined together to give you that real immersive feel. I'm really happy with how that is. And what I'll say as well, this is an aspect of gaming that I don't think people pay attention to all the time, especially some devs, but this time around they've really mastered how to create a satisfying sound when getting a kill and pulling off a headshot. Especially with a sniper. It's a sound that activates your dopamine receptors and makes you want to get another kill. It's just a really satisfying sound. And one of the old school games that I played that did this the best was the multiplayer for Killzone 3, which was another multiplayer game back in the day that I was obsessed with. Even 15 years later, I can still remember the sound of getting a kill in that game. And I have to say, the sound effect that occurs when you get a kill in this game, particularly a headshot with a sniper, is extremely satisfying and equally as rewarding as that sound that they put in Killzone 3. We had a flavour of the different modes in this beta. Of course, the second round of this beta happens this coming weekend with more modes added, such as Rush. I can't remember what other modes they're adding. The new mode that they added, that was the primary mode for this weekend of the beta, was Breakthrough, which I enjoyed. Feels like a slightly less linear version of Rush. But at the same time, and I haven't played Battlefield in a long time, like consistently, I need to play Rush this weekend on the playlist just to get a feel for how Rush feels in comparison to Breakthrough, because as it stands currently, they feel very similar to me. So I don't really know what sets the two apart from my memory. They feel like two very similar modes. Some of the other modes added, you've got Conquest, of course, which plays great, as Conquest should, much more expansive. And then they've got some other modes they've added in, like King of the Hill and Domination, which I think there's an interesting aspect to what they've done in regards to bringing those game modes in, because I think they're trying to target a faster pace gameplay, because that's what those game modes have. Those game modes have much quicker spawns. You don't have to run a great distance to get to the battlefield. It's much quicker engagement in those game modes, which is interesting because it looks like they're targeting the best of both when it comes to Battlefield and Call of Duty. DICE said they want to bring back some classic maps per fan request, which is great, especially because some of my favorite Battlefield maps are no longer exist due to servers on those older games being shut down, so this would be a great way to preserve those maps. Some of those maps, I believe, have already been recreated in other Battlefield titles, such as 2042. So it shouldn't be too hard to bring them across. I forgot the name of the map, but there's a key map from Bad Company 2, which is one of my favourite multiplayer maps of all time. And that map was actually redone on 2042. So the fact that that's already been remade in 2042, I definitely want that map in Battlefield 6. Another map I'd love to have come across is Caspian Border and Operation Metro. Of course, Operation Firestorm has already been announced as one of the maps they're bringing across, which is another classic map from Battlefield 3. Maybe I'll do a video in future of all the maps I want to bring across, because across the franchise, there's a lot of maps that I think are iconic and a lot of maps that I love that I would love to play on again. So I'll probably make another video. Get in the comment section and let me know if you want me to make that video, letting you know all the maps I want to see brought across to Battlefield 6. But I think that's a good idea, and for the longevity of this game and just for the preservation of the franchise and what this franchise was, I think that's a great idea to want to bring across remade versions of the classic maps. Now let me transition to my concerns in a general sense. These aren't all negative in the sense that these are just straight up negatives. Like I said, they're just concerns. They're just things that stood out to me because I wasn't expecting this beta to be perfect, and it's not, and I just do have some concerns as a fan of Battlefield. The TTK, the time to kill, is it too fast? It might be. The jury is still out on that for me. I'm not entirely sure. In some of the game modes, like I said, King of the Hill and Domination, it appears to be balanced for that, in a sense, for how fast-paced those game modes seem to be. But for the larger scale, more classic Battlefield experiences, like a Rush or a Conquest or even Breakthrough, I don't know yet if I feel like the time to kill is a little too quick and might need a bit adjusting. Just something that I'm going to be paying attention to as I play the second weekend of the beta. Another concern I have in terms of the weapons is that the weapons within the same class, out of the ones that I've used so far, they don't feel distinct enough for me at the moment. Now this might change as I unlock more of the weapons with the full game, but like I said, given a taste with the weapons they've given us so far, yeah, I do have concerns over the weapons themselves and how they feel, because they do feel a bit samey so far. So hopefully that's something that they can make more distinct with some work that they can add to tweak and balance those weapons ahead of launch. The user interface for the menu of the game is not good at all. It reminds me of what Call of Duty's been doing in recent years, where they have this like Netflix-esque kind of scrolling, sideways scrolling, horizontal scrolling thing going on with the UI. Not good. I prefer a classic UI of just, scrolling vertically. I don't know why they insist on this whole Netflix kind of thing. A lot of games are doing it, and I don't really know why they're doing it, but they need to sort that out because it's just not good. The game needs a server browser. I really hope they can add that, because that's an element that I used to use a lot back in Battlefield 3. I think it's much better at ensuring that you have a playlist that plays maps that you want in good rotation, so you don't get kind of locked into one map for a very long time on the automatic servers that you join. So I think it'd be beneficial if the game adds that as well. And the last thing I want to just speak about is the maps themselves. Now, the maps are decent so far. Decent to good is what I'd say so far for the maps. And they certainly show promise, but I do want more large-scale maps, like a Caspian Border, for example, because a lot of these maps are narrow in the beta, and they provide a great urban kind of infrastructure to play in, especially when it comes to the destruction. Some of them are really, really intricate in that sense, and it is very satisfying to kind of plow your way through them with a vehicle or explosives and really tear apart the map and see how the map evolves throughout a game and how it changes. Very satisfying. But because we're only getting a small pool of maps at launch, and because the sample size we got in this beta is very similar in the sense that they're very narrow, I do have concerns over whether there are like actual large-scale maps, open-ended maps in this game, because classic Battlefield maps and some of the best Battlefield maps ever, they're huge, and they allow for a lot of different avenues, a lot of different ways to strategize and attack an objective. And I think with the maps that we were given for this beta, because they're so much more narrower, I think you find yourself funneled into only a few different options for routes to take and methods to execute your objectives. And I think that also contributes to the fact that it feels like sometimes when playing this game, you're in the line of fire very often and very quick, and that can result in you getting killed a lot, which is a bit frustrating. So hopefully the new maps that they add for the beta for the second weekend kind of show a greater expansion of the map design, and if it doesn't, then I'm going to be even more concerned. So hopefully the maps are much more expanded than what we've seen so far. But those are my thoughts so far on Battlefield 6's beta. I do feel like it has the potential to be like Battlefield 3 Reborn, and I hope it can pull that off if they stick the landing. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. I will probably be doing a lot more content on Battlefield on this channel now, just like I did back in the old days, because I am very eager and excited for this Battlefield title. It's kind of lit that spark within me, and I haven't felt this way about Battlefield in a very, very long time. So yeah, more videos to come. Speak to you soon.